have time for discussion or questions. But as part of the proposed budget, we have funding that is proposed for a downtown master plan and a townwide mobility plan, and I'd like to kind of go through this just a little bit. For the downtown master plan, it is a plan recommendation that came out of the 2040 plan, both in terms of the policy recommendations and the action plan. And the plan was actually discussed during the January budget retreat. It sounded like it was something that you all wanted staff to expedite, and so I think we're trying to see how quickly we can move and give you a schedule that might meet with your approval. For the budget for the project, we're saying a maximum of $150,000 in town funds, but we would expect to apply for outside funding. And there is potentially a reserve in some funding to be able to offset and not have to use that entire $150,000. And I can elaborate on that if you want to know more about it. The project start, if we were to follow a schedule that I'll show you, we could be moving by summer of 2021, and our estimate is it would take 9 to 12 months to complete. For the townwide mobility plan, again, it is a top recommendation in both the policies and the action plan for the 2040 plan that was adopted recently. In this one, a maximum of $100,000 in town funds. There is a specific pot of money through CARTPO with their planning funds being available with a fall call, but we think we could start the project in the fall or winter of 2021 and be done by the summer or fall of 2022. So first with the downtown master plan. The objectives would be, first of all, we want the place to be attractive and we want to embrace placemaking. It needs to be something that the town is proud of. It needs to be attractive. It needs to be something that people want to visit. And it needs to be something that the community really has some buy-in for and really wants to see happen. It also would be a message to developers or investors of this is how you would be welcome. These are some of the standards that we would like to follow. It also allows us, through the plan, to be able to stop reacting to individual projects and actually proactively work with people who are interested in the downtown and avoid some of the controversy that sometimes arises. It would also potentially help to determine the town's role, if any, in development projects. And it would also, at least in terms of the way we would want to look at it, is if you have somebody who is willing to invest and they are going to do a quality project, would the town be able to move fairly quickly to work with that developer? So there are three major outcomes that we would look for from the downtown plan. There are transportation, land use and urban design, economic development. I think one of the most important things that I can think of in terms of this entire endeavor is we have to figure out what's going to happen with Gilead and 115. We have to know what that streetscape's going to look like. We need to know what kind of right-of-way requirements there are going to be, and we also want to work with the State Department of Transportation to make sure we don't lose the funding opportunities. It also allows us to deal with short and long-term transit issues. As you well know, the issue of transit location along with allowable density is a land use issue that you've already had to deal with. The land use and urban design, a big thing there is what do you do about edge neighborhoods? How can you address compatibility issues? And then for economic development, again, deciding on the role and structure of town involvement. The process notes, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but one of the recommendations we have is to invest in an extensive public participation program. We have a model already in terms of the 2040 Plan Oversight Committee. You could use that, or there may be some other suitable mechanism. But we definitely think that some members from the surrounding neighborhoods ought to be part of any committee that might be formed. You can see that there's different kinds of consultant expertise needed. There is an opportunity, and we would recommend this happen near the end of the project if it's used, but there is a cooperative venture offered by Electricities and Retail Strategies to be able to look at retail recruitment and other kinds of project development types of priorities. So you can see some of the other ones that are in here, but those are some of the biggies. The schedule, we're at a point now where we think we have a pretty good handle on what the RFP contents can be as well as the scope of work. We're more than ready to put together a public involvement program that would include the creation of a committee. But to go through all of this, and I think what we're looking for is a sign from the commission to tell us whether we ought to move forward or not spend the time doing it. The rest of this can get us all the way into selecting the consultant team and getting started fairly quickly after the beginning of the budget year starts. So, very quick, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Commissioner Munger?
What are the boundaries of downtown?
Well, in the 2040 plan, I think we have some tentative boundaries, but I would not say that those are the boundaries that would govern the project. I think we would look further than that. I definitely think we need to, when it comes to the transportation aspect of it, we really need to look much more broadly than that. So it might depend on the issue that we're talking about. One thing I can tell you, though, is that it doesn't take a great deal of imagination to look at where some of the edges are, where you're right up against neighborhoods. That's probably a good start. But I think we'd have to look at looking at those edges to see, and not like kind of become so narrow-sighted that we're not looking at some of the peripheral neighborhoods.
Kind of a follow-up. Just, do you have any concerns about, given some of the developments that have been approved and some of the things that are in motion, that by the time this is finished, a lot of that area might already be developed?
Quite honestly, I don't think so. It takes a bit of time to be able to put together a development project from due diligence all the way to buying the property and getting the approvals necessary. Mm-hmm. The one factor that I always consider to be very important is if you expect quality from developers, then you have to expect quality from the public realm as a partner through the town's role. So I think that even if you have projects moving forward, you still want to have a quality streetscape that's inviting and attractive and people feel safe either walking, bike riding, or driving.
Commissioner Booth?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Dave, for your presentation. If somebody's sitting at home and wanting to know how they can get on this steering committee, can you tell me what the procedure will be for those folks?
Well, I think first we'd like to establish the procedure with the board to make sure that you're comfortable with it. If you would like to use the 2040 plan model, we can do the same kind of recruitment where we post on the website and advertise through some of our social media to let people know. And then I think word of mouth from the commission that's kind of how we did it with the 2040 plan committee, and we got way more applicants than we were able to, appoint.
Okay, and my last question is that we've all got a lot of email on rail transit centers and hubs, and is that issue going to be addressed?
It has to be, sir.
I'm sorry?
It has to be, I believe. You're not going to be able to settle your land use issues in terms of densities for the downtown unless you talk about both short and long-term transit. So we have a north corridor bus rapid transit study that's going to begin on Tuesday. That committee begins its work. But we also have to look at really what does the red line mean, and how does that affect the land use decisions that we're going to have for the downtown.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, appreciate it. Question, I know we've done this in the Ordinance Advisory Board, we've talked about it in the past about stormwater, you know, trying to get, sometimes we have small lots, stormwater takes up a lot of space, we've talked about doing a community stormwater pond, something like that. Do you think that will be addressed in this?
You know, there are some very interesting, if you start looking at some kind of an economic development strategy for the downtown, I don't necessarily think in terms of, oh boy, let's just throw some money at a developer. But I do think that if you have some public improvement strategies that benefit both the public and the ability to develop in the downtown, that's a really good thing. So you could start talking about centralized stormwater structures. You could start talking about centralized parking structures and look at some kind of a revenue-producing tool that way. So there's a lot of things you can do if you start looking on a broader level than at the site. If you try to do everything from the site level, I think it makes it much more challenging.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Bass?
Thank you. Mr. Hill, thank you for all of your work up to this point and this presentation. I, for one, feel very strongly about updating this master plan for downtown. And when you're talking economic development, you're talking the potentially addressing stormwater needs. I had already written down parking as one. These are things that make us a successful downtown, just a couple of these pieces, in addition to everything else that you've presented. So I, for one, am in support of moving forward with this downtown master plan. I'm not going to beat around the bush with you on that. For me, I'm in. I think that we need to get this rolling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The comment I would make is that if we get to a point where we're asked to move forward with a formal scope, you're going to have another chance to look at it. And I just want to make sure we certainly don't want to miss anything that the commission wants addressed as part of the plan. So we want another go around for you to be able to take a look at something like that.
I would like to say the only other question that I have for you in regards to the steering committee is the thought process in regards to that steering committee to be made up of individuals who not only live downtown but work downtown?
Yes, ma'am. I think you have to have some representation both from the neighborhoods that have been fairly vocal lately. I think they need to be part of the discussion. But I do think we need the community-wide kind of perspective sitting at the table as well.
When you're looking at the downtown and creating the steering committee and downtown boundaries in general, kind of going back to Commissioner Munger, we are looking across the tracks as well, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Encompassing the full, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Dave, could you go back a couple of slides to the 3 key areas? Okay. Some of these areas, I think we've incorporated sidewalk, greenway, bikeway. It seems like we have that plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about the economic development portion of this, but I guess my biggest concern or question is we're following a plan right now in terms of 2040 or any of the downtown streetscape and all that. So the outcome of this would be, how would it benefit from what the direction is that we're already going?
Well, first of all, again, I can't emphasize enough how important I think it is to get some kind of handle on what's going to happen at the intersection at 115 and Gilead. Right now, that is an unresolved issue as far as I can tell. And it hasn't helped that the state has delayed the project. On the land use side, I think that any time that you might have a development application come before you, and there continues to be kind of this idea that it's too much, thank you, too much density, and then you're trying to compare it against the older regulations that are in place, I think it creates a lose-lose situation, quite frankly. And I think we'd like to give a better sense of really what kind of density is considered to be appropriate in the downtown. So that's another one. I think the third one that is really a question I can't answer for you, and that is knowing that you have some investment energy and development interest in the downtown, do you want to play a role? I mean, do you want to start to emphasize curb and gutter, stormwater improvements? Do you want to start even considering an expedited development review process? You know, there are some things you can do, and I hate the idea, every time you see economic development, the implication is we're just going to give public money, cash to the developer. And that's certainly not, I think, what we would be looking for. I think there are different ways to look at it, too. There are times when you see somebody who might want to do a project, but the risk is fairly high, and I call that a pioneer project. And maybe you consider for pioneer projects a policy that says, well, maybe some infrastructure improvements to stimulate that development or to make it happen would be appropriate, but later on, when there's no risk there and it's a fairly assured thing, we're not going to have the same kind of policy, you know, for a Johnny-come-lately. So I think there's some different ways you can look at how much you might want to stimulate and take advantage of the current development interest in the downtown. If you don't want to do that, you may decide you don't want to, you know, to have that kind of a role.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? I guess the board's still comfortable moving forward, so we'll be in the budget.
Okay, townwide mobility plan. And I will confess to you that I am the one that pushed this all the way through the 2040 plan and would argue with anybody who tried to relegate it to less than important status. So I'm going to tell you that's my bias right now. The townwide mobility plan, I think, is something that would allow the town to become much more proactive in understanding and organizing the transportation system. There are so many things going on in Huntersville, so many actors, so much money being programmed, that I think that I would, you know, there are times when we get questions from people doing due diligence or even a member of the board here asking questions about the status of any given project, and you feel like you're scrambling, looking through all of the plans and schematics, trying to figure out what's going on. So we'd like to create some kind of an organized system to deal with this process and have it actually be interactive, so that you don't have to chase it down. It's right there in front of you. We also have a lot of discrepancies in terms of our small area plans and other things that need to be rectified. And we also have a new 2040 plan, and there may be some calibration needed to look at the land use assumptions in the 2040 plan. An example I can give is, you know, we really recognize in the 2040 plan along Beatty's Ford, there's a critical watershed area, and the likelihood of significant new density, very high density, I think we kind of realize that, and I don't think we're looking at down zoning or reducing development rights, but we did acknowledge the fact that it's not likely that some parts of this town are not going to develop as quickly as others. So that helps. In talking with Stephen Trott, one of the questions is, do we really understand what our system capacity is? If you look at the 2040 plan, you look at future development, existing development, do we know what the roadway capacity needs to be? You know, we keep talking about all of these state and federally funded program projects, but do we really know what our local system needs to be? And the answer is no, we don't really know. So that's another question we can answer. The obvious capital funding assistance would be part of this plan. It would also allow to establish some town transportation policies that would be very important in representing this community when it comes to agencies like CARTPO or the North Carolina Department of Transportation. And we also have regional plans that are going to affect us. So during the survey for the 2040 plan, traffic and congestion and multimodalism became very, very important during the public input process. And then the key findings that you see on the right, top 10 requested park amenities, greenways, natural hiking and fitness trails. This is straight out of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan that was recently adopted. So it's not just roadway transportation, but it's multimodal. Huntersville, that's one of the things that hit me in the face when I first started working here. Huntersville loves its greenways and it loves its bikeways. So to keep moving in that direction, I think is what the mobility plan would help. So the policy for the mobility plan contains several different recommendations. I'm not going to read all of these, but it gives you an idea of the breadth of information that we would like to compile in one place. The mobility plan is a short-term, high-priority recommendation, as well as looking at consistency with NCDOT projects, aligning with community objectives, and quite honestly, this goes all the way back to what happens at Gilead and 115. What does the community want in terms of the livability, walkability, the enhancing of downtown versus pushing traffic through that sometimes becomes a priority of the state. So we need to work through that. So the outcomes would be an interactive plan covering the whole town and ETJ. We would take all local plans, regional plans, state plans, and reflect them in the mobility plan and then keep it updated. We would make sure that if, for example, a bikeways plan is amended, then that has to automatically amend the mobility plan so that you always have consistency and you don't have to go back 5 years from now and pay money to update them again. And then looking at a possible capacity analysis so that we look at the future land use plan for the 2040 plan and look at the roadway improvements and see if they're congruent with each other. Process notes. This one is a little bit different, and the reason I say that is I think we have some transportation partners that we would like to engage with. So we could consider a steering committee, but we could also consider either separate establishment of a technical committee, or we could add technical experts as part of a steering committee. We would need consultant expertise, and we would also have to coordinate with ongoing planning efforts to make sure that we're keeping up to date with things as they're happening. My hope is that with the improved GIS capabilities of the planning department, as well as working with the engineering department, that we could have an interactive GIS system so that for any roadway or any greenway or side path or bike trail, you'd be able to look and see what the cross-section would look like and what it's proposed to be. And I think it's also a very, very effective tool for communicating with developers, because a lot of times they want to know what's going on and it takes a little while to get them the information. The most obvious way to try to fund this without using, or trying to use as little of that $100,000 is to go to CARTPO and for their fall call for projects. They have an 80-20 match requirement for local funds, and we could potentially, really take advantage of that and possibly fund almost 80% of the entire project. But again, it's the same type of question we're asking, staff is asking of the board. Is this a priority before we start spending time and money trying to put a formal scope together, proposing to you a structure for a steering committee? Do you want us to proceed or should we hold off for a little bit. So with that, I'll stop.
Commissioner Walsh?
First of all, I think it's a great idea. We have a mobility plan. When you talk about town transportation policies, we've got CIP lists for sidewalks, roads, the state's got their CIP. We've got, what is the actual outcome? When you say a town transportation policy, what does that look like?
I can give you an example. You look at Statesville Road, Gilead up to NC 73. That's proposed to be a super street. So it might not be a bad idea to have a formal policy that says we don't want that kind of a cross-section if you can't guarantee us that bike and pedestrian crossings can't be accommodated and done safely. I think that you have several opportunities to, and I don't want to sound combative, but there are times when it seems as though some kinds of cross-sections or facility types being proposed by the state work well in rural settings or suburban settings, but not in urban settings. So I think being able to say this is the kind of cross-section we want, this is the kind of character we want adjacent to these neighborhoods that are on 21, you can pick and choose some of those topics and say, here's our formal policy on it. It helps a great deal when it comes to communicating with agencies outside of Huntersville.
Okay. And then I don't remember the whole timeline, but like 2 years? Was that, can you go back one slide, I think it was?
Commissioner Walsh, it's transportation. Takes a while.
It's killing me, 2 years. I mean, is there any way to, the world changes in 2 years. Is there any way to
Yeah.
make that happen a little bit faster?
I think what is influencing this particular schedule is the availability of the CARPO funds, if you want to minimize the town's liability or obligation.
And what would you think that amount of money would be? If you were just, I'm not holding you to it, just,
I think that it could be, it depends on what we want, okay? And for this particular project, for example, if we were to look for a capacity analysis for Huntersville's roadways, or we're looking for a GIS model that would be interactive, we would have to go out and issue the RFP and have several parts to this and decide how we want to package a contract. So it could be anywhere from $100,000 to $200,000. But if we could do $200,000 and the city's exposure is 20 grand, I think that's a bargain.
thank you.
Just another thing for Commissioner Hines to do.
So my question is capacity. If we're just studying Huntersville, is this something we should try to get Cornelius to come alongside and possibly even Davidson? Because our roads are impacted very heavily by our neighbors to the north and even to the west and the east. I know that Concord and Denver are not part of our MPO.
Right.
But I think that I would like to look at it a little bit more broadly than just Huntersville because, for example, 89 to 90% of our employees that work in Huntersville, they don't live here.
Mm-hmm.
So that last number I knew was like 26,000 people that work here. 24,000 of them roughly, 23 don't even live here. So they're impacting our roadway. So I'm trying to reconcile how you do a capacity analysis on a road, say in east part of Huntersville, how that's impacted, but we're not counting other cars coming in from other locations. So I don't know if you thought of that or not.
Well, I think, and maybe I misspoke a little bit, you have to, your point of departure has to be the regional model. You have to take into account the regional traffic that has to be accommodated. So you have, statewide mobility, and, that pretty much is looking at connectivity way beyond our boundaries, for example. So the question is, if you know what the regional volume projections are, the problem is that I don't really think they get down to the local street level. So you look at your regional picture and then you start taking a departure, and I guess, Stephen, am I correct, a sub-regional capacity analysis would be the way to term it? And I quite honestly, until we scope something like that, the one thing I've been doing is looking at a bunch of mobility plans, and the part that I find a little bit perhaps not relevant to Huntersville is I've seen several examples where all they do is spend their time on greenways and bikeways, and they don't look, I mean, the whole character of Huntersville can change with all of these arterial programmed changes or you know, widenings that are going to occur. So I think you still have to pay attention to all of your road surface improvements, and I think we have to do that here. I just, when I think of how much money is programmed and how much that's going to change the face of Huntersville, I can't see how you could possibly ignore that and just say, well, go ahead, NCDOT, just go for it, and we'll just react to it after the fact. I just don't think you want to do that.
Any other questions, comments? All right, sounds like some more studies are on the way.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. 5:35, so see you all in 25 minutes.